Hey, everybody, it's Donovan with the Music Retail Podcast. I want to thank you for being here today and for watching today's episode. I think you're going to really enjoy it. You know, my goal with the Music Retail Podcast is to interview people that are interesting, that have something to give and to share, that can help you build a better business. In order to make sure you receive future updates, please like and subscribe. That not only will keep you in the loop for things as they come up, but it also helps the YouTube algorithm to know that people actually like this content and will share it around. Okay, let's get to the interview. Ted Brown opened the doors to his first music store in 1931, and today Ted Brown Music has grown to become a leader in the Northwest music community, serving the diverse needs of 6 cities across Washington state. From instrument rentals and repairs to guitars, drums, pro audio, music lessons, live events, and more, Ted Brown Music is Washington's premier provider of all things music. Our guest today is Whitney Brown Grisaffi, president of Ted Brown Music. So Whitney, welcome to the Music Retail Podcast. So glad that you could join me today.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
You are just in town. You just got back to work as well. You've been on a very important mission the last few days, adding an important member to your family. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, a very important mission. I flew all the way from Tacoma, Washington to Greenville, South Carolina to get the new love of my life, Kona, the King Charles Spaniel puppy.
And, oh my gosh.
Yes. I'm absolutely in love. And there was a bonus because I got to visit and stay with my sister, Leslie.
Oh, nice.
And visit with her husband, my brother-in-law, Scott Peck of Pecknell Music. So
seeing Scott was okay. Seeing your sister was nice, but really it's all about getting this King Cavia for
Kona.
Sure. Yeah.
It's all about finding Kona. Yes.
Yeah, we have a King Cav as well, and we're in good company. Larry King famously was a fan of King Cavalier Spaniels. Chris Elliott, who played the mayor in Schitt's Creek, if there's any Schitt's Creek fans out there, plus a bunch of other stuff, he's a King Cavia owner, and lots of people, of course, just love this dog, and this dog has been bred to essentially just kind of fall in love with its owner, and they're just irresistible. My wife got ours from a rescue, and I think it's the only time in our 23 years of marriage that she said, I want to get a dog. And I was like, no, like, we don't need another dog. We're totally fine. And she's like, yeah, I wasn't asking. And, and so she went and got this dog, and I was so mad. And I was like, I don't want this dog. It's a small dog. And that lasted a couple of weeks. And then just, man, our King Cavia is Emma, and she just totally wrapped me around her finger. And they now she's like the only creature I share snacks with and food with and stuff like that. They're just the best. So well, I'm super happy for you. That's going to make 2021 a great year, regardless of how the rest of it goes.
I have to agree, even if it is starting off with a few sleepless nights, because he's still on East Coast time.
Delightful.
Oh yeah,
goodness. All right, so I mentioned in the opening Ted Brown Music, and you're in Washington State and all these locations and stuff, but kind of give me the actual background. Like, tell me about Ted, when he started it, and then tell me your background and how you got into the role that you're at today.
Okay, well that's an easy story. So Ted is my grandfather, and he was working for Sherman Clay's, and it was during the Depression. So our official anniversary is March 21st, 1931. So we'll be 90 this year.
Holy cow.
Yeah. But Ted's job was to, at that point in time, he was shutting down some of the Sherman Clay's, and they decided that they were going to leave Tacoma. And rather than shut down Tacoma after he'd done some others for them, he just said, how about I buy it from you? And so he bought their inventory, and in the middle of a depression, as my father used to say, I don't know what made Ted think that he could run a music store better than a national chain, but he decided he could, and 90 years later, here we are. So he opened March 21st, 1931 in the middle of a depression. Just a really brave, bold move, and he had 14 employees. So I think he probably bought their employees too.
Yeah. I've heard that though a lot. As I've done these interviews, there are so many businesses that have that kind of longevity were started during the Depression or started in very difficult and challenging times. And a lot of times it's just out of necessity. I can't get a job, so therefore I'll start this thing. And you can't help but wonder if there's people out there today in the same boat. Is there the next Ted Brown Music that is going to be able to cite that they started in a pandemic? And it's going to be really fascinating, I think, to kind of see what comes out of that. So he started it, and it was a bold move. It's the Depression. His actual job was to close down other music stores, and he decided instead, like, well, let me buy a couple of these. Was he a musician?
Yes, but that's that was not really his real profession. He just enjoyed music, but really he was an entrepreneur and just a big community leader. So I think he just felt that Tacoma couldn't lose the music store, and so that was part of his motivation.
Oh, gotcha.
But yeah, he was not like a professional musician or anything.
Right. But we were in the same boat when we bought Fazios Music in St. Louis. We weren't looking to buy a store. Out of respect for Mike Fazio, we went to look at it when he said he was going to close, and we kind of felt the same way. Like, we just felt like, gosh, this is such a great store and great people here, and this community needs something like that. And next thing we know, we bought a store. So sometimes that the stores find you. I mean, those things happen. Yeah. So he ran it, and then who kind of took the reins after your grandfather?
So my father did, and he took over in 1960, and at that point in time, Ted had kind of run his course, and he was tired, so to speak.
Sure.
And so Dad came in with enthusiasm and a new plan, and was able to help the store grow. It was kind of struggling at the time. So it was pretty much, hey, you're either going to choose a career in the Army, or you're going to come back and run the family business. And so he opted to come back and run the family business, because it just kind of, it needed some changes. So he opted in, and so he was in from 1960, and my dad was just a really, smart businessman, great with numbers, and was able, I turn it around. Yeah, maybe that's the right word, but just really was able to make a thriving, successful business out of one that was just kind of struggling at the time. We had one location, and our hands were tied, or his hands were tied, because the landlord wouldn't let him open another one within I think it was like a 20-mile radius. Well,
wow,
we were struggling, yeah. And this was the late 60s then, and so he'd been running it for a while, but the Tacoma Mall was opening. So in the late 60s, early 70s, that's when all the malls opened.
Yeah.
Well, everybody was moving out of downtown. So all the the big names at the time, Sears is one that people will recognize, and or what used to be Macy's, which was the Bon Marché, and all the big stores were moving out. So he had to move to the mall, but that was within 5 miles. So I told the landlord, you're either going to let me open the store at the mall, or I'm going to go out of business and you won't have a tenant at all.
Right.
So good for him. We moved out. We did not move out of downtown. We stayed downtown because we had 50,000 square feet downtown.
Holy cow.
Big building. It didn't look that big, but we sold pianos and TVs and stereo systems, and think about how big those are.
Mm-hmm.
So they take up a lot of space, and each of the floors was not real big, but so that's why you had to have like 5 floors.
Yeah.
So anyway, he ended up opening up out of the mall, and we opened out of the mall with the Wurlitzer organs and TVs, and pianos. Because that's, of course, what people wanted, and that was the fad at the time. And,
yeah.
And yeah, so side note, my current store manager in Tacoma started with us when she was 15. And she was this, 15-year-old high school student that could play the organ. And so she was the one playing the organ out on the edge of the store to attract people to come in and say, what's that? And she'd get them started about how easy it was, and then turn them over to a salesperson to, seal the deal, so to speak. But
yeah,
other than I think we had about a 10-year lapse. she's been working for us pretty much her entire career.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it started, I mean, gosh, there's so many of our music stores that were that way during that time period, right? Selling TVs and stereo systems, or maybe selling organs as well. Probably around the 60s and 70s, got into the guitar business, I would guess. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'd be about right. We also sold records to go with the, with the stereo.
Really common too, yep.
And so I'm thinking, I wish I knew the dates because so much of that is before my time, but it made sense because you're selling the records and rock and roll is becoming a hit.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted the electric guitar because of the Beatles and all that business. So, but band instruments came in sooner. We started as the piano store because it was Sherman Clay. It was a piano store and print music. And then band instruments came in, and then the rest of the electronics, the radios, which led to TVs. And records, and the records I think led to the guitars, and so it's just one thing leads to the other, and so yeah, so guitars and amplifiers, and then of course when the digital pianos came out, the synthesizers, by that time we'd gotten out of the electronics business, meaning no more radios, no more stereos, no more TVs, and Mike Kay, who still works for us 40 years later, came to my dad with another guy and said, hey, we think you should be selling synths and keyboards and all this. We think you need to be in the electronics business, and we're the guys that are going to help you do that. And my dad looked at him like, oh, no way. And to my dad's credit, he knew a good idea when he saw it, whether he wanted to do it or not.
Sure.
And so after telling these guys, no way, he said yes. And like I said, Mike Kay's been with us 40 years, or just about. One of the best moves that he made by listening to a great idea from somebody else.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. I think you're saying that, and I'm just thinking, like, I've had several times over the years of employees telling me the same thing with keyboards specifically, and each time I tell them, no, we're not going to do that. Like, none of us even play, or don't play well enough to sell. I think that's kind of important. But if we're going to get into something like Nord keyboards and stuff, to be able to actually, we sell like digital pianos and like home keyboards, but not for the professional level. But maybe I've been too stubborn and wrong all these years. Maybe I should have said yes.
Well, on the other hand, we did get out of pianos. And
there you go. So I'm vindicated.
We don't do home keyboards. We do pretty much only professional stuff or really amateur.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. Maybe I'm vindicated then. So then when did you come into the business? So being that it's grandfather and father, you've probably like always been around it, right?
Yeah, that really is true. Because he already owned the store by the time I was born. But so as little kids, we're brought into the store to, whether it be dust pianos or clean toilets. Yeah, everybody has that story if you were raised in the industry. You do all the little things around the store that nobody wants to do, and hey, you can earn 50 cents if you come and do this. So yeah, I have distinct memories of being pretty little and doing some work around the store just for fun, so to speak. But really, it was about 12 when I said, yeah, this is really what I'm going to do, and I announced it. So hey, I'm going to take over the store, Dad, and you don't have to worry about that because here's the heir apparent. What can I say? And that was just kind of that's always been me. And I have two older sisters and one younger sister, and nobody else really spoke like that. So it was always understood that that's we knew Whitney was going to do that. But as you know, I have a sister in the industry, and we didn't quite know that Stephanie was going to do that because she was a little more shy about her ambitions. So yeah, really
fortune favors the bold, right?
Exactly.
Even if you're 12, like, just you got to name it and claim it.
Yep. And so that's what I went to school for. That was the plan all along, and I worked. We all worked at the store during high school and through college and breaks and all that business. And I had some other jobs because when I was at school, didn't work at the store because I was not going to school in Tacoma. So I had some other jobs. And when I graduated, the dad said, yes, of course, we expect you to come back, but I also expect you to go get a job someplace else and see what it's like to have a career someplace else. So of all things, I was in the mortgage industry, and I did spec home loans for builders, because at the time I graduated, there was a whole lot of building going on in Tacoma, in the Tacoma area. So lots of new houses, and that was actually a lot of fun. And I did that for a couple of years until we did a family planning session.
What was fun about the spec home lending?
Oh gosh.
And what time period is this? Like where are we at in time?
Late 80s.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the site inspections. So part of what I did is I would go out to the new, and they were homes. They were not buildings, they were homes. So I'd go out to the new homes, and number one, that's fun because isn't it fun to see a house being built and like,
sure,
oh, this will be the master room and that, bedroom and the kitchen, and oh, this layout's really cool. And so I got to walk all those houses. And the reason why I did that is because I was releasing funds. So, okay, electrical's in, now you get paid for the electrical, and
gotcha.
Plumbing's in, so now you get paid for the plumbing. So as working in the industry though, I'm in a dress and heels. That was work attire. But then you go to a construction site. So here
right.
I am in my dress, and I now have rubber galoshes on so that I can make my way through through the construction site. And I just kept them in the back, in the trunk of my car. And
yeah.
And then you get to be really good friends with the builders because they're coming in regularly, especially the big contractors that are doing a lot of builds. And they know how to party like the music industry knows how to party. So that was the other fun part. There was a whole lot of fun parties. I'm in my early 20s and I'm like, yeah, let's go, man. So,
oh my gosh. So you're glad you had that experience?
Absolutely.
Right.
It was really humbling too, because growing up at the music store, I knew the answers. I didn't have a whole lot of those, oh, what do I say? Or that nervousness about my job. And going into this other job as a career, so to speak, I really feel for my employees. It gave me that, okay, I know what it's like to have a new job. You want to do it right. You want to do well. You want to make your boss proud. You want to make yourself proud. All of those things, and that nervousness, which is exciting though too. It's exciting nervousness. But even this long after I've been doing what I'm doing, I still feel that with my new employees, and I appreciate it because it is starting a new job is a big deal.
It's a hard thing to keep fresh in your mind, right? To remember what those early days are like. And there's so many things. I just went through this myself in the last week or so, something that like now is so second nature to me that I didn't even think to pass it along to the employee who could have benefited from it. And unfortunately, I get to pay the price for him learning the lesson. And like, shoot, I should have been a little more hands-on about that. Well, now we've learned it. He and I both learned the lesson here. So,
ouch.
Oh goodness, yeah. That's only a few $1,000s. What does it matter? Just have to cut the trip to Cancun shorter next time, or I don't know. So, all right. So you were in the home loan industry for a while, and then left that to come back to work, or to come back to the store. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Probably early 90s at this point.
It was. Well, I only did that for a couple of years, so it was 89 when I came back to the store, and that's because we did succession planning. I said family planning, so you'll probably have to cut that one out.
Oh no, let's leave that one in. I want everyone to hear about like, oh, we're doing family planning now. Okay, right. Well, you got to plan for your succession, so you got to get started.
Exactly. Right. There. Good point. So we did do that succession planning, and that's where the four daughters said we're either in or out, and Stephanie was in, and my oldest sister was out, and my youngest sister was out, and so it became Stephanie and me. But when, you know,
Did they elect that themselves? That
we
they?
each did.
Okay,
each made our
I wasn't quite sure if your dad was sitting there like, you're in, you're in, you two are out. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Love you girls, but
it's like a family version of The Bachelor. It's like
oh,
the
God.
Appalachian Bachelor for business. All right, I probably should definitely cut that out. Okay. All right, so
no, we each did our
two
own
sisters
thing.
decide to stay. Two sisters decide to go.
Yep. And at that point in time, it was decided, okay, now it's time for you to come back to the store. You've made your decision. You've had some outside experience. It's time to get you in, and let's start getting you actually trained for succession.
Yeah.
And Stephanie was already working at the store at that time. She and her husband were, they actually helped us expand our stores into Eastern Washington. He was an ed rep for us. And so between him really paving the way as an ed rep and working out of his van in his garage, it built enough business that we were able to open a store in Yakima, Washington. So that was technically our third store. And then I take that back, Richland, Washington, which is Tri-Cities, Washington. They thought they were going to open in Yakima, but when we did the business study, it made more sense to go to Tri-Cities. And that's where Hanford is and the nuclear stuff.
Gotcha.
So it was just a bigger, more thriving community. So we started in Richland in 87, and then Yakima followed after that. So those were our two Eastern Washington stores in the 80s and 90s. And but it was one of those when Stephanie said, yeah, I'm in, and we're all like, great, but how come you decided this? She goes, what do you mean? I've always wanted to be in. So that when I said she was shy earlier, we just hadn't spoken it.
Yeah.
Because she is definitely the more reserved between the two of us. Being outspoken. So, and you know what? Growing up, I was always the annoying little sister, and we honestly, we didn't know that we could be such great friends and such great partners together. We just didn't know it. And luckily it did work out that well, because we get along wonderfully and we complement each other. She's got skills I don't, and vice versa. And so I am so happy that she opted in.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to make sure I cut that part out so she doesn't hear it. So
it's all me.
That's right. That's right. So when you both come back into the business, and then what's your role at that point?
At that point, I was managing one of our stores. So at that point, we were still at the mall, but my job was to move us out of the mall and into an independent or a separate retail location by the mall. We were done doing mall hours and mall rules and all that craziness.
Yeah.
So we moved into our own location, and that became my store, and I managed that store for a few years. And
gotcha.
She at that point was still in Eastern Washington, so we were quite separated at the time. So she and her husband he was being the ed rep out of there, and the two of them were co-managing the store. And so I managed one and she managed one, and eventually we all came together. She moved back to Tacoma, and I moved down to the Tacoma store because the main store in Tacoma was, of course, where all the big stuff happens. And
right.
It was mid-90s about that time. And Dad could start handing stuff off. Oh, you do that. Oh, you do that. And when Stephanie came back to Tacoma, she was in the office manager and I was the Tacoma store manager. And we still had a general manager in the mix that was helping to coordinate the other locations.
Gotcha.
But it was a good chance for Dad to do some training hands-on and start to dole out some of the stuff, lighten his own load. And but it was over a course of like 10 years.
Sure. So you're managing a store, she's managing the office. Where do we go from there? We're in the mid-90s now.
Yeah. So Ted Brown Music starts to struggle again because
it happens.
It happens. And
yes,
downtown, kind of had a regeneration, and then it started to die again. And they were getting ready. The city was getting ready to put in a light rail system. Well, the light rail system was going to go directly behind our store. which meant that we couldn't get deliveries because we had deliveries on that street. And you couldn't get a semi down the street, that the front Broadway. So Broadway is the front of our store, and it was a one-way with a curvy. They tried to make like a pedestrian park mall thing out of it. And at one point, they actually cut the street off completely. And so when they reopened it, it was this curvy, silly little thing that no semi could get down. So it was one of those, we've got to move. We're never going to be able to sustain our business out of this location. Back to Dad says yes when he hears a good idea. So we said, well, we got to move. We've got to find a new place. We started looking, and we ended up building our own building, and that's the building we're in now. And at this point, this is our 20th year in this location. We started talking about it, found the site, and Dad's like, I am too old for a mortgage. And we're like, yeah, but Ted Brown Music is too young to not have a mortgage.
Right.
So we got to do this. So he said yes. And I guess the other piece is at that point in time, we'd already been doing some stock transfers. And he said, well, you guys are majority stockholders. I guess I've outvoted. So, maybe there was some of that too.
Right.
But he knew a good idea. He knew what was right, and it was time to move. So we built this building, and one of the things, we moved in 2001, and in February, the building it's a concrete tilt-up building. So what they do is they pour the concrete on the ground, then they tilt it up to make the walls. Well, so we had 3 of 4 walls, and we'd had a 6.2 earthquake. And we all said, well, let's go out and see if the building's still standing. So, we know we can withstand that because it was still standing. And then we made the move September 1st, 2001. And think about what happened 10 days later. Yeah, the world changed 10 days later.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then that was the start of real struggle.
And so this is the flagship store. This is the store you're still in today.
Yes.
Right. So, and what's the square footage of this location?
32,000.
32,000, which is massive still.
I mean,
massive. It's nowhere near the 50,000 that you had before.
But what's so funny is by the time we got rid of all that extra big inventory, customers thought that we were about a 2,000 square foot store because that's what they saw. I mean, a 10,000 square foot store. So 5,000 for the product and another 5,000 for the print. And they really only saw 2.5 stories. They saw the main store, the main level, the office, which was a mezzanine, and then the 3rd floor, which was all print music. And so when we moved out here, everybody thought we had grown so much because they didn't know that we had 2 floors below us and a whole building next door because we utilize it for customers. So everybody thought, oh my gosh, Ted Brown Music has grown so much.
Right.
Really what it was is we turned it around and everything now was out on the floor and not being stored as opposed to being stored and not out on the floor.
Right. Yeah,
so
exactly.
We have a pretty small warehouse now and a great big show floor.
It's a beautiful store too. Tell me how the design process came to be. I've always, anytime I hear Ted Brown Music, I always picture the outside of the store. Yeah. The outside of the store is really, really cool. So tell me how how the outside design happened, but then also tell me about the interior design, because that's like a whole other game. And anyone who's ever built a store, usually there's an architect who's doing all the outside type stuff, but then on the inside, they just give you a box.
You're right.
And that's a whole other game to figure out what to do on the inside. So when was that process done again? And then kind of walk me through who was on the team.
So that was in the 2000s when we started talking about it, because we actually broke ground in late 2000. And so prior to that, we'd hired the architect and hired the general contractor. So the architect came up with this, the idea of the building and having the corner entrance. So then they came to us with, hey, well, we can have this kind of shape of stuff on the outside of the building just to give it some texture and contour. And we can have, this shape or this shape. And so he gave us choices of shapes. So we picked the shape that it is, which is kind of parabolic on the top.
Yeah.
And it gets narrow at the bottom and wider at the top. And then he said, and what do you want to cover it with? Well, we took a tour around town, and there was a church that was redoing its copper steeple at the time. And Dad said, that's it. We need to cover those things in copper.
That's so cool.
And the other thing is the way our building is situated, we're visible from I-5. And so by being that tall and having the copper in the sunlight, it just glows. And when you say, you know, Ted Brown Music, and you can see us off of I-5, they're like, oh yeah, the copper building. Everybody knows it. Everybody.
Yeah.
And it's still beautiful 20 years later. It still glows because we sealed it. So it has not turned just that dull brown. It's still a glowing copper color. So yeah, to my dad's credit and to the church's credit, because it was the steeple that he saw with that beautiful shiny copper out there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the other fun design is the architects played a little bit with this. When you look at the windows, we have square windows, and it's a big square window and then 3 smaller windows.
Mm-hmm.
And think about the rhythm of Beethoven's Fifth. Da, 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 da. That's what it is. 3 small windows up high with a big window down low. And that theme goes throughout the windows of the store.
That's really cool.
It is.
That's
fun.
really cool. That's someone getting a little too clever.
Okay, so we had good architects.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That was his idea. So we did that. Now, like I said, this was the 2000s. So Glenn Ingalls was the store design guy to go to.
Yep.
At that time. So Glenn Ingalls helped us design the interior of the store. And, you know, we talked about what we wanted and how we wanted customers to move throughout the store. And so he helped us design the inside and figure out some of the nooks and crannies that we built in. And 20 years later, it hasn't had huge changes, but we've definitely
you've changed the flooring
for things that
you've changed the flooring, right?
Oh yeah, change the flooring. You know, obviously refreshed paint, but we haven't changed the paint colors because we really like. It's very Northwest, tans and greens and
yeah.
You know, some of that. So one of the things we have done is we've actually torn down some walls. We've expanded our repair shop. We've repurposed some other space to then. We took a classroom and turned that into our recital room because we took our old recital room and turned it into part of the repair shop.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's some ways to redesign and rethink some of ways to make a big space accommodate what starts to feel like a small space.
Right.
You know, we're looking around the store going, we're running out of room. Well, not really. We just have to move some walls and change our ideas about where we move things. And we're about to undergo another change with storage and trying to make room in the warehouse as our internet business has increased. The good thing that, of course, a pandemic can bring around is changes in the way you do business. And
yeah,
absolutely.
I want to touch on that here in a minute, but before we leave the store talk, just a couple things for anyone who's going through this to think about it. I think that's so important. Around the same time, our main store, Springfield Music, was built, and we didn't use Glenn Ingalls, but we used. Oh my gosh, I had his name the whole time you were talking, and then I just dropped it. There was the 2 big guys doing store designs for NAMM. And it was Glenn Ingalls. And it was this other guy, and they alternated between who would have the NAMM store, because you know they used to do that store, the featured store.
Yep.
Chris Miller from Pacific Store Designs.
I'm glad you came
there we go. And I knew that if I kept talking about it, it would come back to me. So we hired Chris Miller from Pacific Store Designs to do ours. And boy, you get someone who's designed lots of stores. It's amazing what they come up with, and really how durable those designs are.
Yeah.
We just now we did a small refresh mainly with flooring in 2009 because a car drove through our store, so that gave us insurance money to do that. But here we are now in 2021, and we're doing an interior refresh of that store, mainly updating paint colors because our store was built in the late 90s. So we had burgundies, we had, those kind of grays, and just a few, mainly the burgundy color was kind of the color that dates it to the 90s.
Yep.
And so we're kind of refreshing all of that. But it's definitely worth getting a professional, unless you just like really have a skill for this. Some people just have that design skill. But if not, man, getting a professional to come in and to pick, not only just the colors and stuff, but just to, layouts and everything else. They have so much experience having done so many stores, and most store owners have done one. Like it's just a much different experience. So I think it's money for us. We felt like it was money well invested.
Yeah, agreed. We actually had Glenn design 2 other stores for us, but by that time, then we kind of felt like we knew what we were doing. So then we had some do a few designs on our own because, we currently have 6, but we've opened and closed the store in that time frame too, and felt like we kind of knew what we were doing. And sometimes you do, and then you move in, and then you're like, oh yeah, what were we thinking? That wall is ridiculous there. Or
yeah.
It is.
I did our newest store in Kansas City, and by and large, I'm actually pretty happy with it, which I'm surprised because I'm normally not the guy who wants to take that on. I'm usually the one that's like, let's get someone else who's done this. And but I had, the opportunity to kind of learn from some of our other stores and some of our other experiences, much like you described, to have a pretty good idea of what I wanted to pull off. And
I think the other piece about that is, like you said, you kind of knew what you wanted. But that brings me back to when we were first thinking about, changing the stores, taking a tour, looking at other retailers. I think that's one of the best things to help make sure that you make the right choices. Who's doing what well, and what can you steal, borrow, or whatever from other industries and other retailers.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be music retailers. It can be anybody it's like,
it can be anybody.
Cool. Yeah.
There's definitely a couple of elements in the Kansas City store that I've lifted from other stores, and honestly, most of it, it's not even anything that's like crazy creative or whatever, but I just saw someone do something. I'm like, oh, that's a smart way to handle that. Like, I'm going to use the backside of my lesson rooms to create the showroom divider that I need, or whatever. Like, and I'll do a hallway this way. And like, you just kind of see someone do something and think, well, that was really clever,
Yes.
and not very expensive, and it created what the display area needed. And so, yeah, I definitely have lifted some of those elements from things I saw from visiting Page's Music, and slides I've seen from Easy Music and Hawaii, and kind of just apply a few of those favorite things. I don't have any copper. We're in a shopping center in Kansas City, so I don't have any copper on the building. I can't put anything on the exterior, but that's something I should definitely look into.
Well, it looks cool, but unfortunately, it's still one of those things that sometimes is so attractive to people that want to steal from you. We've actually had copper stolen off the side.
Oh, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. And that stuff.
Use your power. We've good, man. What are you doing?
Yeah, we've had 2 catalytic converters stolen off the same box truck. They stole it, and then we replaced it, and they stole it the next night. And we've now had to put one on that's removable. And so every time we want to drive the box truck, we have to go install the catalytic converter.
Oh my God. Wow.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, so tell me, all right. And so now we're the 2000s, beautiful store. I'm assuming at this point your role has expanded past being a store manager. So tell me about what that kind of, get me to where we are today. Take me from store manager to company president.
Yeah, at some point in time, I became, I changed a couple of titles, and really, by the time we moved out here, I was serving as the general manager at that point, and Dad was still working. And so we moved in September of 2001. In October 2002, so it was a year later, he was diagnosed with cancer. He had melanoma, and melanoma can be really tricky. And so that they started treatment for that. And that the treatment, it wasn't the cancer that took him away, it was the treatment, meaning it really took him away mentally. And we went through a few legal things where, you know, he had to sign. And Stephanie and I are looking at each other going, he should not be signing legal documents. So we had this conversation, and we talked about it. And we're like, he can't do that. And I said, yeah, we need a new president, and it's going to be me. And she's like, yep, I agree. And so, you know, back to as you said, what the fortune favors the bold.
Right.
She agreed because we already knew what we were doing, and she was doing a whole lot of hardware at that time, meaning she was working with the computer, and if there was a computer problem and the POS system, that's what she was doing. And so it just made sense. And she dubbed it that Whitney does software, as in humans, and she did hardware, as in computers. So it just made a lot of sense. And then we went to our parents and said, hey, you know, we need a board of directors meeting. This is what's got to happen. And you could see the relief on their face. That way they didn't have to make the choice. They didn't have to make that decision.
Yeah.
Between the two of us. And they were very happy to have the turnover happen, because mom knew it too, even though dad, you know, he was in and out, kind of, so to speak. The treatment was just very difficult. So he was, you know, when he was lucid, he was good. And then once they took him off that treatment, he came back to us. And so we had him for about 6 months before he passed, and he passed in 2004. But we had dad back.
Yeah.
They took him off the treatment. So that was good.
Yeah.
But so, well, it's a sad story, kind of. It was just one of those, it was inevitable. And after 10 years, we were ready for the change. And I just stepped in as president. And other than vendors having a few freakouts.
Really?
Well, yeah, because the other piece is when I mentioned earlier, 2001 and 9/11 happening. Well, that was kind of the start of some you know, back uphill, downhill, uphill, downhill. So during that time, we'd also decided to change the way we account for our rentals. So we were a rent to own.
Mm-hmm.
We decided our business model truly was a rent to rent. We had 60 to 70% return rate. It was huge.
Holy cow.
Huge. So we're going, well, this is our business model. Apparently we need to be on the rent to rent, because rent to own is just, it's ridiculous. And in Washington State, you pay all that sales tax up front. And Washington State does not have income tax. We only have sales tax. So we pay a lot of sales tax.
Yeah.
We're currently at 10.1 in Tacoma, for instance. So we would have to pay all that huge, you know, tax bill in September, and then you get it back little by little as those instruments are coming back. Well, it's a really hard way to run a business.
Yeah.
So we talked to the bank, talked to the banker. This is what we're going to do. We know what it's going to, you know, we know what's going to happen to it, what our assets are going to look like, our accounts receivable are going to look like. We know what it's going to do. We need you to know what it's going to do. And the banker's like, yeah, got it. No problem. Do it. So we do it. Well, guess what? He forgot to communicate.
Oh,
to his
no.
boss. So now all of a sudden he's getting the what has happened to Ted Brown Music? And then it goes up the food chain. And because of the way it affected our books, we fell out of covenants. It didn't change anything in our in our cash. I mean, you know, well, it did change anything in our cash flow, but you know, we're not missing payments. We're not missing anything.
Yeah.
No reason for the bank to panic.
Just changes your balance sheet.
Right.
Yeah.
And because we fell out of covenants, all of a sudden we go into special services. So we have this issue. We now have a dad that's sick. So the banker, whose bosses and whose bosses are upset, they now know they have an owner, president, that's sick. So we've got this big perfect storm. You know, the bottom line, the balance sheet is changing, the owner's sick, Ted Brown Music, it's going down. And thank heavens for groups, idea groups. So we happen to be a member of the Omega Group. One of the things that this group does is shares lots of ideas, you know, best practices and marketing ideas and all that. But the best thing that this group does is we share financials, and we know each other's businesses financially. We go to our annual, well, we meet twice a year, but we went to our fall meeting and we started talking about what was going on. And long story short, that group made a subcommittee who then talked about what Ted Brown Music needs to do in order to get ourselves straight with the bank and take care of the business that we had to take care of before they called loan.
Right.
And it was the Omega Group that told us, by the way, they are going to call the loan. At this point in time, the bank would own everything, the building, the business, my parents' primary home, my parents' secondary home. They would own everything. Because we were pretty highly leveraged at that time too, because we had a brand new building.
Yeah.
Well, we put together a plan with the subcommittee. I had to make some really hard decisions, make some changes in the company that were very difficult. Like, letting a person that had worked for us for 35 years go because she just didn't fit in anymore. That type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're letting family go at that point in time. And so it was the hardest thing I think I've had to do in my career is go through this transition. And the bank all along was saying, no, we're not going to call the loan. You're just in special services. You just have to jump through these hoops. And oh, by the way, you still have to pay this extra money because you're in special services. So now all the fees go higher and you're paying more and more and more money and you're under their microscope. You couldn't make a move without them giving you permission, basically. So one of the best pieces of advice was go shopping, go bank shopping. You need to go bank shopping because you're going to have to get a new bank. So we did do that. We were able to find another bank that was willing to work with us and partner with us with the way the balance sheet looked. And we pretty much signed papers on April 1st, so to speak. And well, no, we were right there. It was mid-April. Pretty much the bank said, meaning the first bank said, oh yeah, we are going to call the loan and it's up in 2 weeks. It literally, we had 2 weeks. You get other financing. We're like, well, thank God we didn't listen to you.
Yeah.
So that's where those small groups invaluable. That's what, kept us alive and kept us going when we needed that good advice. And we took that really good advice, even though it was really hard to do.
Yeah.
That was probably the hardest thing that I've done in my career. And, things turned around and, because it did fit our business model and it worked better for cash flow and it helped us grow and do what we needed to do in order to continue our success, really. But it was touch and go for a while, and it was scary. Really.
Those sharing groups. It's such a kind of a great segue. Maybe I wasn't planning on talking about it, but I've certainly found in my career that, really, you build your business off of the new things you learn, and you can learn a lot of things from going to the NAMM shows and. Even like going to the NASMD shows, but you can really get into some really deep specialized knowledge when you get into like those sharing groups, and especially if you get into a situation where you start to share your financials, because most of us don't really we only know our financials if we know that. There's how many music store owners actually don't even know their own financials. They just have their accountant look at it, and their accountant tells them you're doing good, you're doing bad, or whatever. They're like, dang, and then they just go on. But to have someone else look at that is so important. And we belong, Springfield Music belongs to the Image Group, and the Image Group is not a group that shares financials. And I think it's to our detriment. And I was a board member at large for a couple of years. And during that time, I tried to push to get us to like, hey, let's do this. Let's share. And we did it we created a small group. We called ourselves the Fab Four to kind of test the program. And we basically did it much of how I've heard Omega and other groups operate. We went and visited each other's stores. We interviewed staff, and kind of did all the things that I've heard about other groups doing. And we did a financial review, and just found that so powerful. Each of our stores we went to, we all came away with 6-figure ideas and improvements that we would have never figured on our own. And it was just so powerful. And unfortunately, Image Group still isn't doing that as an official thing. But anyone who's listening, oh my gosh, if you can. And it can be difficult to get into these groups, right? Because if you've got a competitor that's already in it, you won't be able to be in it. I mean, for the longest time, I would reach out. I remember hearing about the AIM group, and I've always just admired George so much. And so I was like, I'd love to be in the AIM group. And so we applied, and they're like, nope, the person next door to you is already in it. I'm like, shoot, okay. And I'm like, well, the Omega group. I know the guys from Sade Music are in the Omega group, and that's a great group. And so we applied, and like, nope. Those guys down on the other side of the street are in it, like, dang it, what's another group? But yeah, if anyone listening, if you're not in a group, get in a group. It's so powerful. Totally well worth the expense.
There's nothing to say that that you can't even start your own group, like you kind of did within the Image Group. There's nothing to say that you can start your own group. And you talk about competing. Yeah, I think that's one of the important things about the groups is you're not competing with each other, so that you can feel free to share your best ideas, because you're going to benefit and they're going to benefit. The other idea about those groups is it doesn't necessarily even have to be music, but you could still be like, you could even do, like I'm part of the Better Business Bureau group up here in the Northwest, and they're all independent business owners. Mm-hmm. And so we don't share financials, but we definitely are sharing some of the challenges, currently that we're currently going through. So yeah, there's opportunities for groups, whether it be within the industry or within just your city or your area. There's the power of the group.
You can look at Vistage groups as well. They also do financial sharing. A financial review to me, I felt was really helpful, and still think it is. It's really great to have someone else look at it and be able to make recommendations. There's if you don't do that, there's also mastermind groups that people can look at, and there's a lot of those that are both either local or online that you can look at. Where I'm part of a mastermind of other retailers, and we're not music retailers, but we're all retailers, and that's really, really useful because you get some fascinating ideas from other industries. Like, I could totally adapt that program for music. Yeah. But just find something, anything that's out there is really, really useful. There's the Independent Music Store Owners Forum as well, which is a nice resource, but it's bulletin board based and not quite the same thing as doesn't have the depth that these sharing groups has. It's a nice thing to maybe get some ideas and communicate, but boy, if you're not in one, get in some type of sharing group if you can, for sure.
I agree. And even during this time, even though we can't meet in person, as a group, we've actually connected more frequently. We connect monthly via a letter, but now we're doing twice a month. We're getting together as a group online and doing mini training sessions for ourselves.
That's awesome. All right. Jessica needs to get us going in the Image Group. We're not doing enough. So I've got to get her to, trying to get her to do an episode. And so if I can get her to get on the podcast with me, I can just rake her over the coals for, this is what Whitney Brown Grisaffi said that you should be doing. So
or at the very least, gently nudging her down that path.
No, I'm going to force it. I'm going to be very forceful about it. You had mentioned that you're changing up the interior of your store to accommodate for all of the growth that you're seeing in online sales. And I don't necessarily want to go down that path. I think we all understand that if you've are in retail over the last year, you've likely seen a huge growth in online sales. So that one is well understood. But you obviously must feel that this is something that's the growth that you've seen is here to stay for Ted Brown Music if you're going to start changing up your physical space. So tell me a little bit about like kind of what you're prognosticating for the future and how you think that these changes are going to affect you and why you're making the changes to your physical space.
Well, first of all, it's actually a two-pronged growth. Obviously, the online sales have increased. We anticipate that they will, partly because we've just finally gotten better at it. And our customers do want to have the opportunity to buy online. So that's one of the things that we're thinking of. But right now, and it's all done out of our Tacoma store. So that's the first piece is we've got currently 1.5 employees in this. We don't have a space for inventory for the stuff that we know that sells online. So we're really paying attention to what's selling online. And it's not going to be a whole store within a store. It's going to be the stuff that people want to buy from Ted Brown Music specifically. But we need room for that inventory, and we need it handy so that she doesn't have to go throughout the 32,000 square feet and get the product off the sales floor. So we're going to try to take some of the warehouse space that we're currently using to store other things and use that for our online sales. The other thing when I talk about two-pronged growth, even though this year our rentals did not grow, and I don't anticipate 2021 to have any increase in rental instruments either, other than the anomaly of 2020 and 2021, I can't even tell you a year that we haven't grown in rentals. So, and because we haven't put rentals out this year, we're drowning in them. So part of what we're doing is we're changing the way we store our band and orchestra instrument rentals, and we're going to go taller and higher and just more warehouse-like. Currently they're in our studios and they're in any empty space that we can find because we only have a few live lessons going. So we're tripping over instruments. They're in the office. They're everywhere. But rather than continue that way, because we know that we're going to need that space back. This will accommodate a place for band instruments to go that are either in the warehouse or elsewhere. So that will accommodate continued rental increases. That's why we have a bigger shop, because they continue to increase that. So we've got to run, that. So that really is our core business. And that, like I said, and that's growing. But with the online stuff, we're better at it. So what we anticipate is by really following our own trends and watching our own trends, and we are a person that does the tracking of all the third-party sales sites. She also is pretty adept at noticing trends as they're starting to be trends. And so she'll work with the buyers to say, hey, this is going, we need to do this. And we've sold some just funny little stuff online that we wouldn't necessarily sell in the store, but you can sell 100 of them, whatever widget in a month's time, because it's hot online.
Yeah. Are most of your sales through your website directly, or are most of your sales through the third-party sites?
Through mostly third party, but eventually it is leading back to the tedbrownmusic.com. But we're definitely taking advantage of the third party sites.
Gotcha.
The other thing that has actually very little to do with the Tacoma store, when I when Joe Lamond and I talked a year ago in NAM, one of the things I talked about, the theme was Crossroads. And one of the things I talked about there was the other growth part for Ted Brown Music, which is our audio video lighting installation. And that was one of the only things that didn't shut down during the past year, because construction never stopped. And we're working with a lot of general contractors. And since it never stopped, that business or that department continues to grow, and it is producing more sales than a couple of my stores.
Wow.
One little department, so to speak, even though it's obviously not so little if it's producing more than
the stores are.
Lights, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're on track to probably more than double last year's sales.
That's amazing.
So that, and I'm happy for that, since poor rentals are not going to do that for us this year.
Yeah. Yeah. That's tremendous.
Yeah.
The last time I spoke with Hartley Peavy, which was a few years ago, he had mentioned that he's like, you need to get in the install business. And uh, I thought like, yeah, I do. God, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I have no expertise in that whatsoever. And there's a store here in town that kind of specializes in it. And
Oh,
you know, it seems we've done a little bit. We've had a few employees that are kind of good at it. We've got someone now who's a store manager who's also kind of like wanting to do a little bit of this on the side out of one of their stores.
uh-huh.
Um, but it seems like an area that I know like there can be great profits and particularly good cash flow as well, because you're generally ordering the product you need as you need it. At least that's historically the way it's been.
Well, so it looks great, but the way we're doing business right now, it's actually very cash heavy because we're now listed as a subcontractor for the general contractors, and so we're lower on the list to get paid.
Oh,
So it
gotcha.
can be, we couldn't run the business without a line of credit.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we are definitely utilizing a line of credit to do it. But you're right, it looks great. The GMROI, it's in,
Yeah.
it's out, it's in, it's
Yeah.
out. But that's, so it can be cash heavy, but it does definitely take a specialist. And
Yeah.
that's, that's what I learned. I only know a little bit about it. I couldn't, I, you and I were talking about how to set the sound levels for even talking today, and I am so untech savvy that I started moving things around. I thought, no, I'm going to break it. I better leave it alone. Thank heavens I have experts that do know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if they're the other piece is, though, this is in our Eastern Washington stores. So really it's based out of our Tri-Cities store because we also saw the need there. I had the personnel and we saw the need. And
Mm-hmm.
those guys will travel to Western Washington, but a lot of the work we're doing is nearer to the Eastern Washington location. So they're traveling a little bit less.
It's
also find where you're needed.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say is there's such, the history of Ted Brown music. You see that, and you've addressed that today about like, adjusting what you're doing and what you're offering based on what the needs are in the business today. And, I think that's been such a huge asset for the culture of your company is to adapt and change as required, as circumstances change. Thinking about yourself personally, what are some of your biggest assets?
I think I'm a very collaborative leader, and that is the only way I know how to lead people. And I am so thankful that the people I'm working with feel like they want to collaborate with me too. And I listen. I learned that lesson from my dad. We've already talked about, when he heard a good idea, he would go with it. I always start with yes. Sometimes, then we find out, oh yeah, I probably should have started with no, or maybe it turned into a no. You never know. If you don't say yes, then you never know what might happen. So I
Sure.
think that's one of the other things is I bring in my leadership is I am the eternal optimist. Well, of course this should work out. Yes, let's do it. So those are, I think, what I bring is the optimism, the collaboration, the listening, and people really know they are heard. And if we don't go with whatever idea they think is so great, they usually know why. It turns out it wasn't going to work for Ted Brown music, whatever that might be, or it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to work at that time.
Have you always been that way, or has that been a learned skill?
I've certainly honed it over the years, but yeah, I've always preferred to work with a team as a team. We both Ted and my dad Warren were really dictators, and maybe that sounds harsher than it is, but it really was my way or the highway. And that is not how Stephanie.
Some of that's their generation too,
yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just back in the day. That's how work was done.
That is correct.
This is my vision. You go execute it. Like that's all I'm paying you to do. And
and
without a doubt.
And it wasn't bad to be under or work with that, but so really, yes, I have always been that way, but definitely honed it. I've learned because I've learned some lessons. And not that I haven't made a number of mistakes going, no, it should be
Sure.
this way. And yeah, that's come back to bite me on occasion.
I think collaboration is definitely a skill that I've learned. And, I was forced to learn it nearly 20 years ago when I came to Springfield Music, because I was tasked with doing things that I honestly had no idea how to do. And, but I wasn't going to admit to that. And so I would tell Lee, the former owner, like, oh, yeah, I'll work on that. And then he'd leave and I'd go grab a couple people. I'm like, we got to figure out, first of all, what this even means. And then second, how we're going to fulfill this thing. Because Lee wants it done. I just said, we're going to do it. So you got to help me do it. And like, that's kind of how I've been my entire time at Springfield Music. I wasn't that way before. I was way more of kind of do my own thing type of person. But I think getting in at Springfield Music, I kind of got in over my head. And it made me have to learn to do that to survive. But I'm so glad it did, because we wouldn't be where we are today if not for the collaboration and working together as a team.
Yeah.
Certainly not my ability as an inspirational or visionary leader that's got us to where we're at. I think it's our collaboration that's got us. So, all right. So those are wonderful personal assets to have. What's your worst habit?
I procrastinate. I don't want to do that.
If we worked together, we would be collaborating like crazy. Very little will be getting done. We'd be supporting each other's ideas. I'm the same way. All right. Tell me about that. How does that affect you and how do you deal with it? Procrastination is so difficult.
Yeah, it really is. I don't know if you've heard that saying, if you have to swallow frogs, do it in the morning, because the rest of the day is going to get better from there.
Is that just a Northwest saying? I don't know. I've ever heard that before.
I don't know where I heard it, but I've used it as my mantra for a long time, because it does get me moving on the things that I don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And so I do try to get that stuff done in the morning. And, really where it bites me, and which is why I'm much better at it than I used to be, it's because I let my people down. If I don't take care of, if I really do procrastinate to the point of letting people down, how can I hold them accountable for doing their job when I haven't even done my job?
Yep.
But I really do say, sometimes like, I just don't want to think about that. That's a worry for another day. So I tend to put it off until I know it's not necessarily last minute, but I do tend to put it off until, okay, I now have to deal with it.
Yeah. So, I do the same thing. Are you into Colby at all? Or do you know what Colby is?
No, tell me about it.
Colby is, how would you describe this? I'm going to describe it poorly using all the wrong words. It's not personality testing. It's not aptitude testing, but it's basically a test that helps you to identify like how you like to interact with the world. Oh, okay. And so one of the things that is part of the Colby test is basically like the actual like doing of projects. And, there's some people that, in college, your professor says, all right, at the end of the semester, you're going to have this paper due. It's got to be 10 pages. There's some people that'll go, okay, well, I've got 3 months to prepare for that. So I'm going to spend 1 month doing research. So I'll go one night a week to the library and do my research. And then I've got 1 month to write the paper. And then I've got 1 month to revise the paper. And there's those types of people that just that's my dream. I wish I was that way. Yeah, and then there's me who's like, that paper is due in 2 days. Like, shoot. All right, I'm going to go to the library. And I used to like have a lot of personal guilt about the fact that I needed a deadline and I had to be up against it to like really put forth my best work. But after taking that Colby test, I realized like, no, that's just how my brain is wired. And, to fight it really doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes more sense to kind of lean into it and understand, I need to be aware of that. There's times I need to kind of circumvent that behavior of mine. And there's other times where I just know, like, I'm going to do my best work if I push this to the deadline. So I'm not going to worry about it until then. And then I'm just going to like go nuts. So I need to clear the decks for the 2 days before this is done. But don't feel bad about it. That's how you're wired. That's how you're supposed to be. But if there's a responsibility or job that doesn't need that, you really need to get that to someone else. So,
Yeah, well, thanks. I just learned something today.
Oh man, Colby, I absolutely love it. It ranks you, and there's no like good or bad. It just tells you just this is how you are. And if you have your team tested, then you can also help determine like people that actually work together. And
Yeah.
sometimes people use tests like the Myers-Briggs or whatever, and that test is largely garbage in my opinion. Like it's not meaningful. It doesn't tell how people like to work. It's about like personalities and stuff like that. All of us are humans. Like we can adapt to people's personalities. Like that's not a big deal, but we have a lot of friction if we don't understand how the other person operates and works. You know, if you pair me with the person who wants to like segment each piece of a project out and work on it bit by bit or whatever, and then I'm supposed to work with that person, we're going to have friction out the wazoo, even though we may personally like each other. Yeah. But if we know that going in, that person can then figure out like, all right, here's your deadlines, and they can give me things that make me perform my best. But if they don't know that, I'm just going to frustrate them like crazy, and I'm going to feel like they're micromanaging me. So anyway, this isn't a Colby sales thing, but I found it to be really useful and would encourage it. So anyone to look into it. So usually I ask about biggest challenges and big successes, but I think we really covered that with the whole thing about the lending story and the banking story. Is there another story? And actually, give me just a second to pause so I can find this portion because I'm going to edit this out. Okay. Is there another story that you feel like also would address that biggest challenge or biggest success? If there is, share it. If not, don't worry, and I can move along.
Well, just to tie on to the audio video lighting, we call it our AVL department. One of the reasons why I think that is such a big success is because I had an employee who started with us just as a part-time salesperson, worked his way up, became that store manager, worked himself into a very successful store, grew that store, grew his employees, outgrew his skills as manager because he had so many employees. He was no longer happy. He was stressed out. He needed something different. So my point in that is we worked with him because we knew he had value to the company. We didn't want him to burn himself out so badly that he was going to leave us. So part of that success was giving him the tools and the opportunity to find another way to grow with Ted Brown Music. And I think across the board, it's really important to look at your shining stars and figure out how to help make them grow, because that is part of your success. That's absolutely part of Ted Brown Music's success. I have the AVL department because I let him grow. I have a 40-year, tenured employee because we've given him, this is a different guy, Mike, given him a chance to grow and expand and become the people that they want to be in their careers with Ted Brown Music, which has led to Ted Brown Music's success. And I've got employee after employee after employee. That's one of the other things that I think has led to my personal success, because it's their success that then leads to Ted Brown Music's success. And so I call it my personal success because I've given them a chance to be personally successful.
That's such an important thing to highlight, because you're not just taking an employee that maybe has burned out, or maybe the culture or the business has changed, they haven't changed with it, an employee that needs to be replaced. You're not just saying, well, let's take them from here and we'll just stick them over in this other spot. You're taking someone who's been a star for you, someone who's been successful, and you're putting them in a new role where they can thrive once again. You're kind of culling them from the rest of the tree and replanting it again so it can grow and do something new. And that's such an important thing to do, because I think so many times we as business owners will get stuck, and we just feel like, I can't make this change. This person's doing it, but this person clearly needs a change, but I don't know what to do. And it's an awkward conversation, so I'm just going to live with it. And then we either live with it far too long, or we live it to the point that we just sort of explode and make a decision maybe that we regret. But it's so much better if we can find an opportunity for them to thrive. Is there a place in our company where they can go? And I'm currently doing that with 2 employees myself. And, I'm still in the middle of it, so I can't report back on the successes.
Not yet, at least.
Not yet. But I'm optimistic that it will. So when you did that with your employee that took over for the live sound and the installation and all that kind of stuff, what were some of the challenges that you encountered through that? Because I mean, has it just been smooth sailing ever since you did that? Like, did he take to it as like a fish to water, just bam, off to the races, it worked great? Or were there some obstacles and delays and challenges to get there?
Well, so there was obstacles and delays and challenges to get there to start with. He was definitely, as the store manager, stressed and overworked.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was, it was prior to the change that all the problems were, we hired a life coach. We needed to do something with him because it was uncomfortable for him. It was uncomfortable for his employees. And so once we decided that he had this desire to go down that path, he's definitely a salesman, and he wasn't able to sell anymore. So yeah, quite honestly, once we made the change and we found the right guy to support him, because he needed a partner. So we found the partner, and all growth is by leaps. I mean, by peaks and valleys, rather. And so, he definitely had peaks and valleys, but pretty much once we made the change, it was a replant, and the roots grew. But it was leading up to it that you had all the problems.
Yeah.
So, and quite honestly, he's such a great guy. It's not like his problems were terrible, but personally, it was terrible for him. It wasn't so terrible for Ted Brown Music, but personally, it was for him.
Yeah. He wasn't in the spot that it was time for something new, time for another way to grow. I totally get that. So this has been really fun. So last question I always ask is, if you could send a message to yourself 10 years ago, what would you tell the younger you?
Continue to be patient with yourself, because it's so hard to do. I think I know I am my own worst critic. I know there's so many of us in this position that are our own worst critics. So continue to be patient with yourself, because you're going to make mistakes.
Okay, that's a first. Most people have the same answer. Most people have the same answer. Not that one, a totally different answer, but they all almost answer the same way. You're the first person to have ever said that. So I think you're speaking to me now, because I need to hear this. So tell me, what does that mean? What does it mean to be patient with yourself? I'm not patient, period. So I don't think I even understand the definition of the word. So what does being patient with yourself look like to you?
Well, I think whenever that mistake is made, or, and for lack of a better word, whether it be a mistake or, it's that self-talk in your head. So you can see it when other people are talking poorly to themselves. Think about your kids, for instance, and you're trying to give your kid that pep talk. Hey, it's not as bad as you think it is. So, let's look at this side, or let's look at that side. So that's the language I try to tell myself, is it's maybe not as bad as you think it is. And let's try to see how, see what you can do to make it feel better for whatever it is, for yourself and or for those around you. I don't think I'm describing it well, but the best thing I can think about how you would advise your friend had your friend made that same mistake. So I'm trying to use that self language.
Yeah. God, that's so important. We should all stop and realize, like, we are the stories we tell ourselves. So what story is running through your head about yourself?
Yes.
Mine's often not very good. I got to tell you, it's often not good. All right. That was good. I need that. Okay. And then finally, what would you tell yourself 10 years in the future?
Go out and enjoy what you are retiring to. Because
What
in
are
10
you
years, I
retiring to?
expect to be retiring to something.
Yeah.
I haven't decided yet.
Yeah. You've got a little puppy, so like you've
And
got
I
that.
should still have I should still have
He'll be
a
a dog by that
dog
point,
by that.
but yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think well, I don't know what I'm going to be doing 10 years from now. I do anticipate that I will want to be retired because I do have my succession plan in place, and assuming all goes as planned, I'll have the opportunity to retire to something else. And that's actually just a phrase I heard just recently. Rather than retiring from, you're retiring to. And it gives
Yeah.
you an opportunity to think about what's next and a purpose and a goal. And because I'll still have lots of energy and lots of life, I anticipate. So I get to retire to do something else.
I love it. What is the succession plan for Ted Brown Music?
Woohoo, the fourth generation. So I have three sons, and right now one of them is working for me. He's managing one of our stores, and his intent is to stay with the business and be, between my sister and me, our succession plan. I have a third son that is just graduated from college and kind of doing his, what am I going to do for my career for a little while, and we'll see if he decides that he wants to join the business. But right now I have one absolutely in, and
Awesome.
so we're running with that one, and we'll see where else it goes.